Just kind of a disclaimer, this next part, we are getting into kind of sci-fi slash philosophy territory a little bit. So this is just a fun thought experiment and to sort of expand your mind a little bit, right? So the prevailing scientific theory for the formation of the universe is the Big Bang. But even the Big Bang can't explain the very first seconds of the universe. And the Big Bang doesn't explain how everything started, what happened before time existed, etc. So, we've always had religion to fill the gaps for things that we don't understand. But I ask you, what if those religious tales actually come from some sort of original source of truth that has been somewhat lost throughout time? And you know that many people believe in some form of creationism, right? Even in the scientific community, where we tend to kind of skew more towards the atheist or agnostic side a little bit more. And I'm sure that since this is a space page, you might have heard of the ancient astronauts theory, which states that, aliens came here from somewhere else and they seeded life here on purpose, or they created us or hybridized us or something like that. Think about the Anunnaki theory and things like that. So the thought experiment that I would like to pose today is that perhaps when ancient religions saw gods coming down from the sky, what they actually saw were aliens. And so if you look at Arthur C. Clarke's saying that any sufficiently advanced technology is essentially indistinguishable from magic, right? Wouldn't a sufficiently advanced species with a lot of technology, wouldn't they seem to be basically magical or like a god to us? And so the thought experiment that I would like to pose to you is, could God and aliens essentially be the same thing? Just something kind of interesting to think about. So now I am kind of interested in what Gerd thought about this. So, and I didn't read this part yet, so it'll be interesting. So he says, now let's turn from rockets into the mind itself. Is faith in extraterrestrials really so different from faith in God? If you've asked yourself that, you're not alone. It's a question as old as our myths and as fresh as this morning's headlines. In 1968, Erich von Däniken published Chariots of the Gods and claimed alien visitors built our ancient wonders. Zecharia Sitchin pushed further. He translated Sumerian gods, but I say translated because a lot of people disagree with his translations, but that's a whole different story for a different video. But he recasted Sumerian gods as travelers from a planet called Nibiru. Catchy stories, but the evidence really isn't there, and that is fair, Gerd. And that's why I said this is just a thought experiment. No peer-reviewed study supports ancient astronauts, just loose interpretations, mistranslations, and a quiet insult to the genius of ancient builders. And that is a fair thing that people point out, is that maybe it's just, maybe we're just not giving enough credit to ancient people. As Carl Sagan put it, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and this one doesn't fully measure up. So, one thing I will say, though, is that some of the fantastical stories of religion have kind of ended up being true, such as the global flood stories, right? Like, the entire Earth didn't flood, but during the Younger Dryas about 12,000 years ago, there was definitely, like, mega-regional floods that would have seemed global to the people of the time, right? So, I don't know. That's why I'm like, is there actually some truth to these stories? But again, they also thought that, the blood moon meant that, like, everyone was going to die or whatever too. So and we know now that that's just light. So just because there's a story doesn't mean that there's something in it. But like I said, when you have all different religions, so, between Indian Vedas, Sumerian texts, Assyrian, Islam, right? Basically every single religion, every single creation story kind of describes a being creating us, leaving, us falling into evil or bad times, and then them coming back to save us. And like I said, it's just kind of interesting that maybe these are just basic concepts that, all humans use to explain the same things, or maybe it's, something more to it, and that they're actually trying to tell a real story. And, something else interesting I heard recently is that, maybe aliens that are here were already here, right? And that's what they think about, or that's what some people think about when it comes to the Nibiru and stuff, is that, or the Anunnaki, is that they never really left. They just went down into the oceans, to whatever, the far side of the moon, and they're kind of watching us from, corners of the Earth and corners of our solar system that we can't reach. And interestingly enough, you see that we've mapped the entire moon. Well, we haven't mapped close to the entire ocean. So I just want to show you guys something kind of interesting here. So when you're looking at Google Earth, you will notice that it looks like you have sea depth, right? Like they have a good idea of what the different sea depths are. But the truth of the matter is, so you see where you see these lines? These are all the parts of the seafloor that are accurately measured, and that's because these are, shipping boats as they go by. They have sonar that maps the bottom of the ocean floor directly underneath them. But basically, except for these lines, the ocean is not mapped. A lot of this stuff is basically just estimated, right? So this line right here is accurate because that was mapped under a boat. Same thing with probably this. All of this, no idea what all of this is, right? So it is true that the bottom of the ocean is very unexplored. But yeah, the galaxy holds hundreds of billions of stars, and even if life is mildly common, where is everybody? We can't find them. So maybe civilizations are rare, maybe they're short-lived, maybe we simply haven't listened long enough. SETI's only really searched for 65 years. So, God or aliens? Both of them ask us to accept something unseen, which is outside of the bounds of science. There's a real difference, though. Faith in God rests on spiritual experience and tradition. Belief in extraterrestrial life rests increasingly on probability and data. But I could argue, and so would Geard, that the two things are exactly the same, and perhaps, religious people and scientific people don't need to be arguing so much. Perhaps it's just a difference in interpretation, right? So the better question is, how big is your imagination willing to be? So this is where curiosity is important. Four robotic landers rewrote lunar history, from 2 billion-year-old lavas to the first far-side samples. We got Jared Isaacman, a new administrator, flying a crew around the moon in 2026 and aiming for boots on the surface, which I don't think is going to happen by 2028. I mean, it will happen, but not by 2028. And an ancient question, are we alone and who made us? It's a question that we've all been asking forever since the beginning of time, and nobody has ever really been able to answer, and, we might never be able to answer it, but sometimes the seemingly impossible or unanswerable questions are the most fun to ponder on. So what connects this all is curiosity. It's the engine behind every launch and every prayer sent forward. This article was written specifically for you by freeastroscience.com. And actually, that is why I love you so much, Gerd. I appreciate it so much because when I tell Gerd that I'm going live and I tell him the idea of my live, he usually just goes and writes an article for me. And I just think that that's so awesome. And then, I do my research still, but then I have kind of a second opinion on everything that I'm talking about, which I just think is amazing. So thanks again to Gerd and Free Astroscience for writing this article for me. Thanks to everybody who tuned in on MattyAtoms and on Free Astroscience. Hey everyone, it's Matty. You just saw a short clip from a longer live video, so make sure to check out the link to that video if you're interested in seeing more. And of course, make sure to like, comment, and share this with somebody who you think would be interested. Thanks a lot. I hope you learned something new today. Peace.